So, dear friends, this is an opening session, and it is very special because you understood that we've been started working this morning. We kept the title and the quality of the speakers at the rostrum here today is such that we said we kept the word inaugural, but opening, but it is quite a fascinating topic. First, I would like to tell you all on behalf of the team of the Cercle Économiques, President, who Françoise Benamou, and the team of Mermoz, which organized the Rencontres d'Aix, well, to welcome you all and tell you that we're on track. It's going to be interesting. I'll tell you that in 2 words in a minute. I would like to dedicate this session, this 24th session of the Rencontres Économiques d'Aix en Provence, to our friends who passed away, Philippe Martin, that everybody loved there. And if you allow me, say, as we did this morning, we could give him a round of applause in his memory. Now, a couple of words about the history of the Rencontres as we experienced them for the last 6-8 months and the last 3 weeks with the, the rather random collapse of the parliamentary session of the parliament, dissolution of the parliament. We decided 8 months ago to have a very optimistic program, whereas we all felt that all forms of violence, international violence, in Europe, verbal violence, violence between, warring violence within countries. Well, we felt that problems were occurring, and I want to say it myself, but in a very unmodest way. I wrote a book called A World of Violence 10 years ago, but it is now depleted, but anyway, it's very good. And it was a very good book, nevertheless. Then we imagined with the Mermoz team and the team of the Marion and others, the idea of being positive. Then comes the dissolution of the parliament on Sunday, 8:30 p.m. And I have to say, ever since then, we haven't stopped 1 minute. We had to, it was an amazing work from the team. We had to reorganize the program. We had to get the politicians out of the scope because they did it themselves, because they were all candidates. They would rather been here because they've all been bit anyway. So. And then, well, they were not candidates. And anyway, we kept the unions, we kept the idea that we were going to talk in the way we can link worlds, and especially with a trend to talk about France. Sorry about that, sorry. We'll talk about France because, of course, there will be the elections on Sunday, actually, and as you're probably aware of, it's a bit of a mess. Well, anyway, let's face it, that's the way it is. So this dissolution, stupid dissolution for France, for a country, but it's good for the Rencontres Économiques. It's a great thing for us, actually. It's a mess for France, but it's an opportunity for us. But for the last 24 years, with a lot of we've been coherent. We came up with proposals. We imagined solutions. And of course, 99% of our proposals, like any proposal from economists, they've been totally ignored by politicians who are not economists. And anyway, we thought, okay, well, 2/3 of the French, this has impacted the whole of Europe and has impacted also the US. So this trend, this movement of population, the change of population, which goes beyond France, actually. So why are people so angry? Why are people so unsatisfied? Why so much anger? And we thought it'd be great, actually, if we could identify, maybe not in an exhaustive manner, but if we could identify, single out the 10, 12-ish problems unsolved, not treated, not addressed, except for bullshit, basically, or for the last 20 years in France, you know, if we had leads that would, you know, in the next 2 days, with a report that will report all of this, then, you know, we won't be useful for Monday, except for the comment that the Cercle des Economistes will make, but we would be useful in a couple of months, 2 or 3 months, when maybe situation will have, dust will have settled down, you know, and we may be back to normal situation where we can discuss and the topics we will put on the top of the pile. Just one example. We got 1.5 million young people who are out of any social fabric. This is not justified. We got the same percentage of kids who want to have normal lives. We have not been we've been unable to solve that problem for the last 20 years. So this is part of the list of issues, problems to be solved. But anyway, and I do hope will be useful in this succession of, well, this set of a few proposals that will be provided to those who will take over, maybe in a more rational, peaceful, and more civilized manner. They will be, you know, trying to address the problems we face. Having said that, and now you're all convinced, I know, well, fully convinced about the interest of that topic. This session with the 6 speakers will be fascinating. You know, they're all great speakers. They will all talk about linking the worlds. You know, this is why it's a specific session. And I will give them all one word. They will have to dwell on that. And I've told them 5 minutes ago, so I've got plenty of time to get ready. Brace for it, and only Mario had 2 words, because Mario Monti, because he was a prime minister once, so he got 2 words. That's what you get when you've been a prime minister. So Mario, you know, former Italian prime minister, you know, high commissioner of in Europe, you know, amazing character, personality. Elisabeth. As an amazing history. She was a business manager. She was the first manager of Hewlett-Packard for 54 African countries, minister for 2 years, and now she runs a lot of entities, an association which is called the Power of the Link. The Power of the Link. Okay, that's the organization she runs now. Then there will be Peter Altmaier, who, as you know, is a former Minister of Economy and Climate and Energy in Germany. And he's also great. He's great. Let's face it. He's top. Is great. When he came, we had the discussion. It was splendid. To my left, then Laura TYSON. Everybody knows Laura TYSON, and she's done great things all over the place. She's a professor in Berkeley and so on and so forth. But mainly, she was the president of the committee of Washington Economists, and this, for all of us, is absolutely fantastic. Then Mrs. MILAN, Elsy, MILAN. So, between Mario, myself, and Peter, and you, I think we get about 45 years of age. You know, if we look at our average, so see, she's a woman who was the first woman, actually, to deal with issues of energy in the pre-COP26. So she's from Lebanon. She has prices everywhere. So we will close with our friend, Mr. Kennedy, Douglas Kennedy. You all know him. Well, he wants to be negative, he said. He says he wants to be negative. Okay, we'll give him a glass of rosé, he'll feel much better. Anyway, so Douglas Kennedy, you all know him. And I love this great book. He wrote 30 books, but the women of the 7th floor, or the 5th floor. So anyway, just to say that the 5 words are as follows. For Mario, rationality and peace. How do we get to that? Okay, 3. You got 3 words. Okay, you know, because you were a great prime minister, so you get 3 words. Now, Elisabeth, it will be humanism, because throughout her life she devoted her life to that. Peter, cooperation, because he's quite worried about European cooperation process and the cooperation between France, Germany, Italy, all the major European countries. Laura, it will be, I can't remember what I said earlier on, Laura, the new international order. New international development, very, very clever, very smart, so very precise. But then she does it in English. I made a mistake, says he. So for you, it will be youth. And for Douglas Kennedy, I've changed the word just now. Optimism. There you go. Deal with that. So it will be culture, of course. So 8 minutes each. Someone will be waving a flag. You know, you only have 7 minutes 30 because I've been too, talkative. Ah, says he. Yeah. Microphone. Could you tell him to take the microphone because I can't hear him? Okay. There is a much measure book. Mario just published a couple of days ago, actually, a book, amazing book, entitled Demagogy, where the politics of illusion lies. How basically the speeches of politicians for the last 20 years is totally useless and announced the death of democracy. Are you okay with that? So this is a top, says he again. You know, he's rich in adjective, our friend here. So, thank you, Mr. President. Dear Jean-Hervé, I thought that by proposing a neologism, at least we instead of having one word each, you know, this neologism would have been assigned to me, but I got 3 words actually instead of 1, more complicated words: rationality, peace, and appeasing. So, and yeah, well, and in addition, I got. I will impose my favorite language, French, which is not the one I speak best among all foreign languages, but I'm very happy to be able to improve it subsequently. Rationality, and the general topic still is that of linking the worlds. Why linking? Why do we need to link the worlds? Do we have to link the world? My initial comment is that the world has never been so linked up as they are today. But if I could shift away for a minute, lots of linked up connections, but with little understanding. You know. So I will. Well, we do have a lot of connections, increasing connections, networks, but decreasing understandings or connections. We know all about the connections, but I have a feeling that despite such growing connections, the more connected we are, the more we want to preserve our own identity. And we therefore multiply differences, divisions, and possibly conflicts. So indeed, also I consider that the worlds are highly connected. We still have to link up the world, but in the meaning of trying to make sure that in addition to the connection, there must be the understanding. because often we don't even make the effort to understand the others. We'd rather remain in our own little bubble of convictions and hostility versus the others. So, in the 6 minutes left to me, I would like to explain the need to have better connections or linkages of the world at three levels. First, in terms of multilateral governance at the European level and at the national or domestic level. At the concerning the multilateral governance, we are witnessing fractures within or existing organizations or entities. When I was a prime minister, at the time when I was a prime minister, I attended the G8 in Camp David, and now G8 has become 7 because Russia has been I've been invited not to come. So the G20 remains G20, but for the last 2 years, it is almost impossible to get cohesion or coherent results in international governance because of the lines of fractures between Russia, Europe, between China, US. So the need to link up the level of multilateral governance, to link up this world that faces increasing fractures, has never been so high. That need has never been so high. Because if we look at the World Trade Organization or the World Health Organization, each organization needs a high level of cohesion to do the job in the various domains of globalization. But in addition, they all fulfill a function which was not recognized 10 years ago. They're all contributing. They all must provide global public goods, be it the fight against climate change, peace, coordination against migration phenomena, and so on and so forth. Second level, Europe. Now, the level the level of that of French-German collaboration. So I don't want to move too much into that, but I would say a word. Let me say a word about Europe and peacefulness. Well, you know, in this world today, I will not advocate for achieving peace, form of peace, but for a certain level of actually insurrection, upheaval, because I think the need for Europe is as acute as it has never been. It is not clear enough that for the populations that the institutional construction of Europe faces a major problem that is at the top. There is the European Council, comprised of 27 heads of states and governments, designed by Louis Giscard d'Estaing and Helmut Schmidt to be a sort of a strategic cell. Now they make any little decision in a national-driven spirit. So, we got 27 heads of states or government who have to decide, but they go back to their little nitty-gritties. So we, citizens, we need to understand that if we want a powerful Europe, competitive, strategically, strong, well, big words are needed, but difficulties come at the level of each member state. So what form of upheaval of the national citizens against the national powers? Otherwise, we never get the Europe that everybody claims to be necessary. And also, as a sort of domain of reflection and action, are trying to link up the worlds at the national level. And this allows me to be fairly brutal and to conclude on that note with the concision associated with brutality. I think that two major countries are facing severe crises in the world. What they have in common is a decision-making structure, which is that the one that people of my generation study at school, at university, as admirable, presidential republics. And I look into this because in my country, in Italy, the current government is trying to change the constitution to borrow this essential aspect, but in a negative way, from these two countries. That is basically, that is the fact that the head of executive power of the state, the president in the US and the president in France, and the prime minister in the reform that is expected in Italy, are directly elected by the people. And this leads, I will finish, this leads to two necessities. Well, the fracture, the division in two of the society and political world, because there's those who have the power and the others. And then I had the opportunity to be called to save Italy at a time when there was a government run by Mr. Berlusconi, who didn't talk to the Democrats. Italy was gone to bankruptcy with an impact on all of Europe. So we had then discussed together. We were able to solve the problem. So that's why, all the, those new world zoological words, appear in the jargon now, ladies and gentlemen, or geological, like collision or fractals. But I think the stop signs have been waved in front of me, and they're about to be aggressive. Eight minutes now. 8 minutes. Elisabeth, pay attention, because when she starts, no ways you can stop her. So there you go. I'm controlling the timing of the others. Good afternoon. I'm of course very, very happy to be here with you, and as you probably seen, the 8 unfortunate minutes that Jean-Hervé gave me with the complicity of Douglas, I've decided, because the topic of humanity is so wide and we gave it so many space in public debate, that I could talk for hours, but I decided to write my message to be sure that we'll stick to the 8 minutes. Now, let me tell you, to start, that it's very precious to be here, essential to be here together when dialogue, listening and exchange in the respect of opinions are so rare, where the noise of conflicts becomes, deafening, and the depth of our reflection has to shrink to damaging tweets of a few words. I want to tell you that I'm very happy to attend these discussions. Well, possibly we'll be able to say things clearly and without, and move on with humanity. For the last 10 years now, I come here to learn and to get inspiration from the experts. Gentlemen, could you be quiet? The lady is talking. Please. Thank you. All right. This is getting out of control now. Remove that from my time. No, okay. So back. So for about 10 years now, I come here to learn and get inspiration from the experts who are not from my world. And it was a great pleasure to take the floor for the last 5 years here as president of the De Novo in France, or president of Hewlett-Packard Africa. And when I was a minister in charge of equality between men and female, I know diversity, equality of chances. This is probably why you want me to talk about humanity, Jean-Hervé. But I have to tell you something. I never felt as much as so many contradictory, scattered emotions when taking the floor here today in Aix, because like many of you here today, I'm fully, acutely aware of the changes taking place today. And I know today we are writing a new page of the history of mankind. The good news is that we are fortunate enough to decide on the chapter each of us will, or collectively we will write. The bad news is that this responsibility, means that we have to take the responsibility, and not everybody seems to be able to accept this responsibility. France is crossing quite an abysmal period, and it is causing so much trouble to me that a few weeks ago I lost sleep. I couldn't sleep anymore. You know, everybody in the country today in France, people talk only about that with an excitement and a strange enthusiasm for some, and for fear, with a lot of fear for others. Oh wait, we could say that a lot of countries in the world will go through some such changes, fair enough. But our country is specific because it was very active in the century of lights, you know, the siècle des Lumières, with intellectual development, which was there to promote rationalism and liberalism against obscurantism and superstitions. This country was built on a philosophical, legal, and political concept based on which any human being has universal rights, inalienable rights, and sacred rights, regardless of the world this person belongs to, regardless of the gender, social origin, nationality, religion, or culture. But if we talk today about the need to link up the worlds, it's because first, we are aware of the fact that such values or ideals have been eroded, and second, we juxtaposed so many parallel worlds, we're stacking up so many worlds that we're no longer living together. It's like we're like living in the same flat, but we've built so many partition walls that we no longer dialogue, we don't talk, we don't understand one another, and there's mistrust, and we fear each other. So some of us, men, women, young, senior, we've lost hope for possible reconciliation. So why am I talking about the relationship between human beings? Because I think we will never be able to link up the worlds if we cannot first link up human beings which constitute the world. Because the world, the planet, the inhabitant, the animals, the environment, more or less natural environment, only makes sense through the experience we gain from it. And mankind thought that progress meant that he had to dominate nature. And once nature has been savaged, well, man wanted to dominate living beings, animals, and women. Of course, we remove the hierarchy of human beings and we turn people into tools. We stigmatized different people like women. Women are considered as different, you know, people who face disability, old people, poor people, only 80% of the planet. Now, to be back to the analogy of the flat, in 1967, the lean white historian said, except for human being, no creature has damaged the habitats with so much avidity and such a speed for exploitation and domination. So therefore today, progress and the power of nations can be summarized with only one figure. Tell me what is your growth rate, and I will tell you if you're important or not. Regardless of the means, only the results count. We don't care about the exploitation of natural resources or human resources. Only economic performance gives you the right to speak, and sometimes you get respect and consideration. A large part of the human population is removed from the global GDP. Doesn't matter. The inequalities explode. This is collateral damage. The planet is being depleted of its resources. We don't care. So how do you want to reconcile worlds in such a context? But, in fact, do we need to reconcile worlds? Well, I do believe that the world is fine as it is. I do believe that the problem is what we make of the world, and this is the question we should ask ourselves. It is our greed that leads us to crashing into the wall. I don't think there are worlds. I believe there is one world and multiples understanding, virtual or real, based on our education, our environment, our institution, you know, the state of mind and so on and so forth. But allow me to share just one element of my personal story, not just to talk about my life and my work, but to open new perspectives and illustrate the meaning of our collective existence. I was born in the Cape Verde Island during the Portuguese colonization. That was, you know, it was a country where poverty was everywhere. And over 500 years of its existence, there were 143 years of starvation caused by drought and as a sort of precursor of climate change. In 1976, meant that we pushed us to leave the archipelago to Portugal and then France. Not a choice, but for survival. And this was the beginning of my voyage between several worlds. I was too young to understand the geographical differences, but I was old enough to understand immediately differences between my initial world and the arrival world. You know, running water at all the taps, electricity in all the rooms, cars in the streets, hospitals well equipped. I was almost in like traveling into the future. Then I started navigating between different worlds, Africa, Europe. Then I started working. I discovered Asia and America. Then I evolved in professional worlds different, such as building industry, new technologies, the legal world, political world, and the political world being the strangest of all. Those various experiences enabled me to establish links between different world, men, women, rich, poor, intellectual workers, the popular districts and bourgeoisie, intellectuals, and what I got from the various experiences is that human beings who compose them, regardless of their place of birth, their gender, age, are all the same. They want happiness, good health, recognition, respect, security, love, connection, and prosperity. And some of them fight with hope, because economic crisis, environmental, social, societal crisis, or political crisis bring to light the injustice of our system, and this is scary. And when we are scared, we tend to shrink back to our little corner, and we are looking for scapegoats. And this is what we're doing in our country. And of all the crises we're experiencing, the crisis of mankind is the most violent and the most dangerous of all the crises, because it shows the absurdity of our human mode of operation and our development model based on the limitless exploitation of natural resources and individuals. So the answer, the most answer, Jean-Hervé, I have to your question. That is, why should we link up the world? Well, simply because it is a question of survival of mankind, because we face too many problems, so, and not one woman, one man, not one state international organization is able to solve them all. So many of our challenges are global challenges. We saw that with the health crisis, and none can be solved isolated. So to link up the world, we need to give a meaning, concrete meaning to our decisions, and to do that, two conditions. First, through vision and formulation of alternatives based not on domination and on philosophy, history and science, the construction of solid institutions, political and cosmopolitic institutions. It is time for mankind to think about the orientation we want to take for the future of the planet, the inhabitants, and the generations to come. It is said that behind each crisis there is opportunity. In such moments when the value of humanity, mankind and charity are lost, but we have to hope that they will come back. And let me close with this quote from Camus, Albert Camus, who said that each generation probably think it is dedicated to redo the world. Mine knows that he will not redo the world, but the task is even larger. Our task, ladies and gentlemen, will consist in preventing the world from being undone.
À mon avis, la seule personne avec laquelle j'aurais...
The only person with whom I can have some type of authority is going to be Peter Altmaier. Now, Peter, 8 minutes, no more, right? Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Now, I see this unexpected German and Italian cooperation that you mentioned. Okay, the topic is to connect worlds, to connect the Italians with the Germans, but also to connect Europeans in general. I feel such pity when I look at the Franco-German cooperation. It's disappeared 2.5 years ago. It's always been tough, this cooperation was. My friends from Italy, Denmark, Spain, etc. were never satisfied. They were always careful about what we're doing. And now they're coming to us and they're saying, we are concerned because the Franco-German cooperation doesn't work any longer, and this will stop European cooperation altogether. And you're right when you say that. There's the global crisis, there's Russian pressure in Ukraine. Look at the developments in the US and other regions of the world. We need this cooperation. And we've worked for this cooperation for 7 decades. And we can't now accept the fact that our political leaders will perhaps turn their backs to this. Therefore, I'm asking you in this room to take initiatives and to work towards this cooperation. I'm saying this to our political leaders. At the time when Emmanuel Macron was elected president at the Élysée, Angela Merkel, the chancellor, had been there for 10 years. And he respected the cooperation. And now Mr. Macron's been here for 8 years, and we have to respect this president on the German side, where a new government was elected 2.5 years ago. So that's what we have to do. That's my second remark. So we're waiting for the November elections in America as well. That was clear from the word go. That is, former President Trump will stand again for these elections, and there are possibilities of him being re-elected. Are we ready for that? Do we have a strategy? Will Europe be able to support Ukraine without the support from the new Donald Trump administration, if necessary? These are questions I'm asking you. We'll have to discuss that. We'll have to solve problems. Number 3. Mario's used 3 keywords. Let me try and do this as well. So, cooperation, competition, and participation or engagement. What do I mean by that? Let's start with cooperation. Now, the extreme right and extreme left parties say we no longer need globalization. We no longer need cooperation in Europe. We'll do the job ourselves. No, it's impossible. It's never been possible to do this since the beginning of the 20th century. It was not possible after the Second World War. European integration started in the 50s. And the promise at the time was cooperation to have better living standards. It's in the Rome Treaty, and the treaty was signed, by the way, at the capital, or where the Roman Senate was meeting 2,000 years ago. And therefore, it is our duty, it's our mission. We have to deliver on that promise. And I have another observation. Why do we need to connect these two worlds, or the worlds? Well, there's something that we find everywhere in our peoples, in France, in Italy, in Germany, in the UK and elsewhere. People are disappointed, and also in Africa, in South America, because people are afraid. They think that we might have forgotten them. that maybe we're not in a position to answer the questions they have. So they're looking for another solution, and that's why they vote for the populist parties. But frankly, I know no populist government in Europe or outside of the borders of Europe that's managed to stick to their words. They start with promises, of course, but then at the end of the day, the situation is worse than ever. But it's not an excuse for us, for the centre parties, for the parties that are ruling. What are the questions that we're faced with in France and in Germany? The questions are simple. You know, we've always been working. We have living conditions that are reasonable. Our children study, they're students or workers, and they know how to make a living. What will the consequences of our actions be? Our actions are necessary. It's necessary to protect the climate. Can we pay the bill, the electricity bill? Can we afford to use our cars? Can we have better insulated homes? Who's going to give us the money? You have the money, but what are you going to do for us? Can you give us some type of guarantee? These are the questions they're asking that we've not answered yet. Today, in Germany, the coalition has agreed on the budget for 2025. But I looked at it quickly. I couldn't find anything on this, and therefore the questions are still up in the air. In order to answer the question, we need strong autonomy. Now, you see, Jean-Hervé, les Rencontres Économiques are really good in terms of linking up the worlds. I really would like to thank you for this. I'd like to thank you personally. I'd like to thank your team and thank all those who've cooperated. But we need to do a lot, much more. We have Europeans in the room, the French, the Germans. I was invited by the Ankelsmans Foundation several years ago in Indonesia, because there was this conversation with young Asian leaders, the young Chinese, or coming from Vietnam, Bangladesh, and Thailand, all of these countries that are developing. And all of these young people, men and women, had the same ideas, same convictions, same needs as the ones we have in France, in Germany, and Italy. So we need to connect these worlds. We need to bridge up these worlds. And of course, there are countries that are not democracies. And I'm convinced, I stand convinced, that democracies are a lot better for our peoples than authoritarian, totalitarian regimes that still exist in the world. But so as to solve the global challenges and problems, we need to cooperate. We need strong economies. And to have strong economies, we still have to protect the climate. So we need to cooperate with Asia, with China. China is producing large quantities of CO2, and without China, we can't do anything in terms of climate change. And China imports and exports products. Without China, the living conditions will go down. And finally, my last point. Third and last point, if we want to give the impression, and more than the impression, if we want to give reassurance to the peoples in Africa, where the Russians and the Chinese have developed very swiftly in the recent years. By the way, why did they do this? Well, because they are disappointed with the Europeans. Mr. Macron and Mrs. Merkel said we need to have a compact with Africa. But what does that mean for us? What about our railways? What about the trains? We need railways because we have a growing population in all the African countries. Well, the Chinese came with the money. Well, of course, with conditions that are not really favorable. And the Russians, they gave them the weapons and military armament and protection. What about the Europeans? Well, they voted for resolutions. Resolutions is really nice, but it will not suffice. And Bruno Le Maire and myself have always cooperated in a friendly manner, and we agreed on the industrial policy that we defended 2 or 3 years ago here at the Rencontres Économiques. And we did that because the thing is that we wanted to merge Alstom with Siemens. That's for the railways business. And the objective was to be more competitive against the Chinese in Africa and South America. Unfortunately, the EC, the European Commission, and you had left, said no. What about the Chinese? Well, they built the biggest railways system in the whole world. They get the money from the Chinese bank. They do that. And what are we doing? What are we doing? And then, finally, the digital question, the digital. In France, we don't talk enough about this, but we have a project, you see, called Gaia X, because there's the economic cloud where the American companies are dominating, and the Chinese as well. They're all interested in that, but they're all saying, stop, stop. Of course I understand this, because there are arguments put forward, but you are the participants. You are the ones who should put pressure on the politicians so that we move ahead and we make progress. I know that some of us are still strong and we can win this battle, win this competition for a better world. Well, I do think I'll have more authority on my left-hand side. Let me have a look. 21 minutes to go, and we still have 3 speakers, 8 minutes. Well, it's going to be tough. Laura, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Let me say in advance, I have written a set of remarks for this session, so I will not be able to make all of them now, but everyone is welcome to read them. I believe they will be translated into French by the Rencontres. Let me also say that I'm going to talk a little bit about something called the Berlin Summit, and that the entire declaration was printed fully in Le Monde and fully in one of the main German newspapers. So you can read what I'm going to say, and I will definitely run out of time, but I will then suggest you read what I've done. Let me just thank you for the invitation. This is my 5th meeting. I have found these meetings fascinating. I have met many important, interesting people, and I've learned a lot about linking the world. So that's first of all. Second of all, X is one of the most beautiful places in the world, so thank you for the opportunity to visit on a regular basis. I am going to talk about how economic interconnections are actually, I use the word fragmenting. We might also say reconfiguring. They're changing. They're changing. The world is basically if you think about it, we had a very, some people call it hyper-globalization phase, probably ending in the 2007-2008 financial crisis. If you looked at measures of globalization at that time, they had never been as high in history, except, and this is really scary, before World War I. Before World War I. So the world was very interconnected when the financial crisis hit, by trade, by investment, by people flows, by intangible idea capital flows, by digital flows. Everything was flowing across borders. And the belief was a positive sum belief that everybody would benefit from globalization. And indeed, if you look at the world, you will see that many of the developing countries in the world actually grew quite well during that period. And of course, if you look at China, my goodness, historic amount of poverty reduction in the world in a very short period of time. Globalization did reduce inequalities among many countries, but it did increase inequalities within countries, and it turned out for the middle class, and the middle class is, I think, from the point of view of democracy, representative democracy, the most important class. The middle class suffered. The middle class suffered. The share of the middle class in the total population declined. The share of middle class incomes compared to the top 10% declined. The share of middle class incomes, if you look at my own generation, I am what's called a baby boomer. 70% of my generation, middle class. My son is a millennial. Only 60% of his generation is middle class right now. So we have a large group of our societies who feel like globalization didn't work too well for them. It didn't work too well for them. They saw industries decline. They saw imports increase. They thought they were competing with low-cost labor from all over the world. They saw the jobs in their communities disappearing and not being replaced by good jobs, being replaced by rather low-income service jobs, as opposed to middle-income, middle-scale manufacturing jobs. Those are going away. They were going away. Now, I want to say globalization was part of the problem, but not all of the problem, because technological change was also causing this to happen. If you look at German factories, for example, highly productive. German manufacturing remains highly productive. German manufacturing employment, like US manufacturing employment, has been declining for decades. What's happened here? Robots. Digital technology, the transformation of the workplace by digital technology so that you get more output per human worker. You don't need that many human workers. But then what's going to happen to the human workers if they're going to go to low service jobs? So that's the problem. I'm summarizing really quick. What's the voter response? Distrust. I don't believe you politicians. I don't believe the system. I've lost control. The control has been lost over my job. The control has been lost because of COVID. It's been lost because of the great financial crisis. It's been lost because I see the climate deteriorating around me, and nobody's doing anything about it. Nobody's doing anything about it. I don't trust you anymore. I guess I'm going to end with a cooperation point, but first a trust point. In global measures of trust, there are only 2 European countries that have more than 50% of the population that trust them. One is the Netherlands, the other is Sweden. France, Germany are like the US. You got like 39% of the population maybe support the politician, maybe 40%. That's not good enough in a representative democracy. It's just not good enough. All right, I am going to end on a positive note, though, despite all of that. First of all, cooperation? Come on. The Russian invasion of the Ukraine was a violation of international law. That is what it was. The Europeans and the US have worked together. They have cooperated to get this addressed. It's a violation of international law. And I want to say, nobody here has mentioned the amazing cooperation that the US and Europe have had in this. Amazing. We've had additional countries join NATO. So I just want to emphasize that. I also want to emphasize possible cooperation on climate, because we're going to hear next from a young person who's involved in the COP process. The COP process is very important. Things are getting done there. Yes, it is slow. Yes, it is painful. But the US and Europe have a tremendous amount of capital that they can devote to climate change. And by the way, the International Energy Agency says that we have about 70% of all the technologies we need right now to combat climate change. What we need is cooperation and finance. Cooperation and finance. We have the finance in the US and Europe. We need to work with the rest of the world, and this is where we have to cooperate with China. I haven't mentioned China, but cooperation on climate is key. And let me turn over to the young person in climate. She should be called climate, not young.
Oui, minutes. Alors.
8 minutes. Right. Well, first, I must thank you from the bottom of my heart. I'm very happy to be in France, a country that's dear to my heart, being from Lebanon, and I'm a young woman who's always looked at France as a model that's pursuing sustainable development goals at European level, regional level, and international level. Today, I have 3 hats on my head, to use this image. I'm a woman, a researcher, I'm young, I'm a foreigner. And thus, I'll be talking about 3 very specific points. To start with, I'll tell you how we can fund decarbonation. Well, we've talked about decarbonation, you see, and climate change. And the thing is, how can we finance this? Number 2, what about the youth then? Where are they? And those who are in the non-developed regions. Number 3, how can we connect the worlds in 2030? A crucial year when we all have to meet the common objectives that we set. First, I must say that I admire you all. I admire you all because I've seen that the conditions that people go through shouldn't go against any of our ambitions. Well, first, the prerequisite, the non-negotiable prerequisite, so as to succeed and fight against climate change, is decarbonation. Decarbonation in the heavy industry, that is oil, the oil industry. They're essential to our survival. We use them every single day. So how can we do this? Because we know that climate change is a major deficiency, if I can say, if we look at the current markets. We cannot factor in the costs on the environment of the CO2 emissions in our business models. How can we reduce the cost of renewable green energies? We need to break even from the economic point of view. And these sources of energy should be more competitive than the conventional sources of energy. This is where we stand. This is when renewables should be chosen. Some people don't prefer these, but all the stakeholders should prefer the renewables and the youth as well. I suppose that the European ministers will be thinking about the estimates given by the EU. In 2050, we need extra financing to the tune of 260 billion euros annually. That is 2.6% of the GDP of the EU in energy, transportation, and building or construction. Now, let's have a look at other regions. We don't necessarily have the numbers for Africa, the Middle East, or Latin America. So how can we assess the transition cost for these regions if there's no transparency in terms of the numbers? Number 2, people need to act in many ways. People and the youth have to act. This is essential. The youth have to be educated, should be in industry, should acquire the skills that are necessary so that they get the green jobs. We must encourage the youth because when they're engaged, when they're committed, what follows is their countries and their governments. Today, there's this opportunity, you see, to reduce gaps between the nations, to build a fairer and more lasting world for all. Number 3, together we need to meet the 2030 objectives. Ladies and gentlemen, we're in 2025. Soon it'll be 2025, the year when I joined the Lebanese delegation in Baku, Azerbaijan for COP29 to talk about a tipping point 10 years before 2030. It's a median point between 2015, when the Paris Agreement came up with global commitments to fight against global change, or climate change, sorry, climate change. So it'll be a very important year. Let's think about progress in the world. Well, I think that we have different views that have been expressed about progress in the world, but all the new developments in the field of international development are important, yet there are still major issues. There are geopolitical tensions. There's war at our doors, at the doors of Europe. There are humanitarian crises in the Middle East. And today, there's interconnectedness between world instability and global change. The geopolitical tensions are in our minds. We're thinking about the elections in France. Now, if you're French, please do something on Sunday and vote. But also in the UK, in the world as well, all over the world, please vote. I count on you so that we can meet the objectives set for 2030. So we have to meet the objectives for renewable energies, and that's still something we can do. And we need to debate economic measures, such as CFDs, contract for differences, the green bonds, and now I must say again that I admire you all, and I think that together we can build a future for all of us. Right, hello. I lived 23 years in London. My 2 kids were born in London. I woke up this morning and I saw a smile on my face. The end of something. By the way, I'll start with a quote from an Irish poet. American and Irish, that's really good to have 2 nationalities. W.B. Yeats. The Second Venue, 1919, just after the First World War. A very important quote. The best don't believe in anything. The worst is swollen with the ardor of evil passions. Something along these lines. Now, this is what's happening today, ladies and gentlemen. This is what's happening right now. Well, I have a number of assumptions about human condition. Number 1, human beings can stand everything as long as they have a BA. Well, that's personal. But also, we're repeating something, I think. Is this the base for human condition? We're repeating ourselves. This is what Freud said. I remember this mate of mine in the US, and in July, he's going to marry for the 4th time. 4 marriages. That's because he's very optimistic. Optimism prevails over experience, but it's always the same woman. Well, but it's the props, the decor, the style that's changed, but it's always a passive-aggressive woman. And what I told him recently, I said, hey, mate, before you marry for the 5th time, because this is bound to happen, you have to find another woman, another passive-aggressive woman, and give her the house before you marry her. Because you know how it's going to end. Is it the same that we're facing today when we're looking at the world? The world's repeating the same political errors. For example, at home in the US, my country, which is so stable and happy today. Well, in the US, everybody's forgotten that, even though during the Second World War and after this, things changed. But it all started as a religious experience. The Puritans that arrived in Massachusetts were the Talibans in the 17th century. Frankly, it was a theocracy. And the reason why the Enlightenment people who wrote our Constitution, Adams and Jefferson, insisted to have a separation between the church and the state, because they understood that in the very soul of the Americans, there was this trend towards theocracy. Okay, right. Now, since the 80s, Reagan, and unfortunately, Reagan arrived, well, after Roosevelt, was the president who had the most influence in the 20th century, unfortunately. So when Reagan was there, he started signing an agreement, a Faustian agreement with the evangelists. And then Bush 1 and then Bush 2 did the same. He was a real Christian, like all the drunkards. Oh, yeah, well. And a friend told me, he said, the problem with Bush number 2, he always wants to have a drink. That's his problem. He was right. But then, and now we have Mr. Trump, who's paid for 20 abortions, who is trying to pick up the porn stars, but he's the Trojan horse for the neo-Christians. And little by little, what are we seeing? We're seeing a secular state which is going down, with homosexual marriage and contraception that'll be targeted. It's bound to happen. But there's something else that my compatriot said not long ago, is that what we see as well is the end of the middle class. I was born in Manhattan at a time when there was a middle class in Manhattan. Both my parents were born in two districts in the Brooklyn, popular districts, and nowadays Manhattan is like Monaco. It's an island for the wealthy ones. Okay, history might repeat itself, but look at the Weimar Republic, the end of the middle class, the death of the middle class. What's the result going to look like? Well, we all know what the result is, but the good thing is that today we're talking about culture. And let me show you, I think, what is the most dangerous thing in the world today. It's this. This is the most dangerous thing. We're so connected and so disconnected. And frankly, what we're seeing more and more is a crumbling down of things. Culture is going down the drain, as well as intellectual life. And with Trump and the Republican Party, but that's the same as well with the far right. The intellectuals are the elite, and culture is for the elite. When, well, in the 60s, I was a kid, and my grandfather on my mother's side, he was Jew. I'm Jewish as well, and he never reached the equivalent of the baccalaureate, or never got to university or the A-level. But he was very proud because every single day he would buy the New York Times. He read everything. And he afterwards joined a readers' club and could read 2 books a month. And I'm proud about this. I remember that my great aunt and uncle fled from Germany after the Crystal Night, and then all Saturdays, they were going to the Metropolitan Opera and they were listening to the radio, and that's one of my best memories when I was a kid. Anyway, frankly, who reads nowadays? Who reads? If I look at people, well, I live in Paris, and when I look at someone who has a book, I'd like to give him a hug. And if we don't have a new generation of people who read, let us be careful, very careful. By the way, my grandfather told me once, I remember, he said, and I'll be over, I'll finish, I read to travel, because he'd never been given the chance to travel. And when I read, he was saying, I discover that we, human beings, we continue to repeat the same silly mistakes. By the way, what my grandfather would say, that's a joke, that's New Yorkie's joke. What's the difference between being sensual and perversion? Sensuality is with a feather, and perversion with a full chicken. And today, the chicken everywhere. Thank you.
Bon, on a vraiment respecté l'horaire puisque chacun.
So they've all respected the clock. So 12 minutes on average. So thank you all. If you're fascinating, well, honestly, it was fascinating. Unfortunately, we could not get a discussion, and I'm not sure there were easy questions for that. Thank you. Bye-bye.